Last week I gave you an assignment. I was asking you to read each day from the scriptures that were assigned and to contemplate what the church is teaching us through her lectionary and through the liturgical movement of the church as we draw near to Great Lent. So what did you do? What did you learn? What did you see? So let's help you out. Let's map it out here. So this last week, we were reading from Mark. We're reading Mark 14. (14:10), and we finished up at Mark 15:15. Okay, so this morning, our Sunday lectionary I forgot. Okay. We actually ended up at Mark 15:41. There we go. And so today, we are reading from Matthew chapter 25, 31 to 46. Next week, we're reading from Luke 19:29 all the way to Luke 23:56. And then on Friday, this coming week, we go into Zechariah, we go into the prophets. And the rest of the period of Great Lent, during the week, we're reading from the prophets. And we do not come back to the gospel or to the gospel of the Lord's Passion until we come to Great and Holy Week, I believe. Hang on. We pick up with Palm Sunday. That's where we actually started this last week on Monday. We read Mark chapter 11, Mark's account of the Lord entering into Jerusalem. And we'll pick it up at that point on Palm Sunday. And then we do not read from the Gospel of the Lord's Passion again until Great and Holy Week. So in the intervening weeks, we're reading from the prophets, except on Saturday and Sunday, because that is the day, those are the days of resurrection.
Well, we read from Genesis, from Isaiah, and from Proverbs.
Proverbs, that's right. We're reading from 3 prophets, and then we'll also move into Exodus. So, the principle that I'm asking you to see and to take to heart is the principle of the church as our teacher. She's teaching us through her lectionary in the setting of her liturgical and sacramental worship. We need to learn to listen to what she's teaching us. So I'm asking you to contemplate what she might be teaching us in the lectionary from this last week, this weekend, and this next week. What is she teaching us? What do you see? In other words, the readings are not separated, isolated readings each day. There's a continuity. They hang together. It's like the narrative that is presenting to us the substance of Great Lent that's coming up. So we read and contemplate these in the light of Great Lent that's approaching. We understand Great Lent in the light of the lectionary. So, what is this all about? Mark chapter 14, verses 10 through 15:41. What's going on? What were you reading this last week, David? Yes. Yes. So it's Christ's passion or his trial. Okay? He's being judged by the nations. The nations are judging Christ. And that's what's happening. That's what was happening this week. We were reading about the nations judging Christ. So what's happening today? What's happening today in today's gospel? Who's judging who? Christ is judging the nations. What's happening next week? We go to Luke. What's happening next week? Hmm? In the lectionary, what's happening in the lectionary? We're going back to, do we go back to the entrance into Jerusalem? Is that what that Luke 19 is about? Okay, so we're going back and we're covering the same ground that Mark was covering last week. Because last week we started with the entrance into Jerusalem. So in Luke, we go back again to the entrance into Jerusalem, and we go all the way to where? 2356. What's happening there?
That's betrayal, Last Supper.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, again, we have, so this is Mark, and this is Luke. And we have again the nations judging Christ. So do you see how the Sunday, today, of Christ judging the nations is sandwiched in between the nations judging Christ? Mark's account, Luke's account. This is all happening before Great Lent starts. So, what does it suggest to you about, the substance of Great Lent? What's going on in Great Lent? How would you understand Great Lent in the light of the lectionary? I'm sorry?
The archetype of souls, evolution, progress.
Okay, let's not get fancy. What do you see? Well, what are you seeing there? What do you see?
It's a reflection of what you have to endure, what you have to go through if you're going to overcome if you overcome death, you're going to overcome your fallen state.
Okay. So the lectionary is a reflection of what Great Lent is all about, which is, no, so say it again. So Great Lent is about what in these terms?
It's an indication of what each believer has to go through, what they have to undergo.
Okay, so be more specific. What precisely are they having to go through?
A death of their own, the death of the self, the death of their own.
Okay. That might be, but I'm going to suggest that you're jumping the track. You're not sticking to the text. Let's stick to the text. So what is, and I think if we stick to the text, what you're saying, we'll have more depth. We'll have more oomph to it.
So you're talking about initial judgment?
Yes. Yeah.
Realization of your own guilt or...
Yes. There you go. Yeah. Great Lent is all about Christ judging me, or submitting myself to Christ's judgment. And when I do that, do I not discover that, in fact, I'm with the nations? I'm judging Christ. I judge Christ in many different ways, many hidden ways. I judge him in many different ways. And so the Great Lent is getting me, it's like okay, you use the word reflection. It's like the lectionary here for the 2 weeks preceding Great Lent are like a mirror. The church is putting the mirror in front of us. So today we've got the sheep and the goats. And Christ is judging the nations and dividing them between the sheep and the goats. Where do you stand? In terms of this morning's gospel, where do you stand? In terms of the gospel readings for the last 2 weeks, where do you stand? Are you with the disciples, or are you with the nations judging Christ? We say the nations, we need to be more specific. Those nations included at the front of the line the Jews. And why is that significant? Why do we not play the game of political correctness? Why, Dan?
Because they were the most set apart and chosen.
They were his own people. They were his own. No, because they were his own people. They were his kin, flesh and blood. They were his kinfolk. They were at the front of the line. Who's the true Jew? Is not the one who's been baptized into Christ?
Yeah.
We are Christ's own kinfolk by virtue of our baptism. So this should be a very sober judgment. You say you're Christ's own. You say you have been baptized. You are the true Israel. You're Christ's kinfolk because of your baptism. So when it comes to it, where do you stand? That's what the lectionary is presenting to us. And even Christ's own disciples, where did they go? Where are they to be found? At his judgment. You know the story. Where are they found?
They're hiding.
Yes, they're hiding. They're fleeing. They're fleeing. Yeah. Now, so, where do I stand? I claim to be a Christian. I think I'm a good guy. But in my soul, in my heart, when push comes to shove, when the test comes, where am I found? You see, that's the question. Now, let's look again at Mark 15, 40 and 41. And then look at Luke 23, 54 through 56. I'm thinking that there is a lesson here. Where do we end? Where did we end on Friday last? Where did we end? And where do we end on Thursday next, before we go into the prophets? What's happening in Mark 15, 40 and 41? Where are we? Christ is on the cross. You want to read those verses? Let's get it in front of us.
41.
40 and 41.
There were also women looking on from afar, among whom were Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James, the younger, and of Joseph and Salome, who when he was in Galilee followed him and ministered to him, and also many other women who came with him to Jerusalem.
So, where are we? Where are we? Where are we? We are mystically with the women. So where are we? Where are we? So we're at the cross. Yes, we're at the cross. We're afar off at the cross. So we come directly from there to this Sunday. Where are we this Sunday? In Matthew's Gospel, where are we? What's the scene? What's the setting? What's on the stage? Matthew 25, 31 to 46. No, where are we? That's when. Where are we? No, not in Matthew 25. Unless he's telling the disciples who are in the upper room. So let's go into the parable that he tells the disciples in the upper room. Where are we in that parable?
We're in the final judgment
Okay, we're standing before what? Before whom?
for the awesome throne of God.
Okay, before the awesome throne of God. So on Friday last, we found ourselves standing with the myrrh-bearing women in front of the cross, afar off. This morning, we find ourselves standing in front of the throne of God, the judgment seat. Do you see a connection? Do you see a connection? On Friday last, we are standing before the cross. We're afar off. Doug reminded me, today we're in the upper room, but in the upper room, Christ is giving us a parable of the last day. And there we find ourselves standing before the throne. Is there a connection between the cross and Christ's throne? A biblical connection?
It's the same thing.
I don't know if it's the same thing, but they're connected. What do we call the cross?
Well, in a certain,
Go back to the Sunday, no, go back to the Feast of the Cross. What do we call the cross?
it is a throne.
What do we call the cross? It's not the throne. What do we call the cross? The footstool. The footstool of what? His throne. His judgment seat. So, going back, on Friday last, we're standing before the cross, the footstool of his judgment seat. This morning, we're standing before the judgment seat, which is the, where he sits and rests his feet on his footstool, which is the cross. So, where? I'm asking this in the sermon this morning too, so you're getting a preview. Where is this last judgment taking place? Where is the last judgment taking place? Stick to the text. Yes, it's taking place at the cross. When is it taking place? Now you have to broaden your scope, broaden your horizons. What are we coming to? I mean, what's the season that we're coming to? Great Lent. I mean, so we're entering Great Lent. As we get ready to enter Great Lent, where has the church placed us through her lectionary? Where has she placed us? This is a no-brainer. Don't be afraid. It's not a trick question. At the cross. As at the judgment seat. So we're coming into Great Lent in the judgment. So where is the judgment taking place? It's taking place at the cross. When is it taking place? Now. Taking place now. It's taking place mystically in our soul. Okay? Taking place in our soul. And that's what Great Lent is all about. Because you notice that we come to Great Lent, and as I was pointing out, we're not reading from the Gospel anymore, except on Saturday and Sunday, because those are the days of the resurrection. We're now reading from the prophets. Genesis, then Exodus, Isaiah, and then we go into Ezekiel and Proverbs. It's a beautiful image. The 6 weeks of Great Lent, you know, they're moving through time, but those 6 weeks, it's as though they're standing still. Because mystically, spiritually, in the church, we are supposed to be standing at the cross, as at the judgment. We are supposed to be submitting ourselves to the judgment of the Lord. The nations are judging Christ. Do I judge Christ? In many different ways. How many ways do I judge Christ? Well, Christ is judging me, whose judgment is going to be true. So, okay. So I think that's what's going on this morning. The church is showing us that as we go into Great Lent, where she's placing us in front of the cross at the judgment seat. So we move into Great Lent at the judgment seat. How are we going to escape the judgment? Is there any way possible that we can escape the judgment? How are we going to do that if it's possible? All right, so let's look at this next gospel, at this next week. What's happening in Luke chapter 23, let's say verses 54 through 56. I think it's 54, maybe 53, but let's start with 54. Somebody start reading at 54.
It was a day of preparation, and the Sabbath was beginning.
And the Sabbath was beginning? Is that what it says? Well, okay, what is it supposed to say? I've said it enough times. Do you remember? What is it supposed to be saying? It was beginning to grow light. That's all it says, beginning.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going.
The women who had come with him from Galilee followed and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. On the Sabbath, they rested according to the commandment.
Okay. So where does the church place us next Sunday? Come on, Barb, stick to the text. Where does she place us next Sunday? With the women. Where are we? Wait a minute. Read it again.
They're at the tomb. They returned.
That's all it says. They returned. and they're at the tomb. And all it says is that they returned. And what did they do in their returning? What did they do? Prepared spices and ointments and rested. When is it? When? What's the Sabbath? The Sabbath. I mean, I think this is very profound and beautiful. So, the church is placing us, as we move into Great Lent, here at the judgment. Well, where is the judgment? The judgment is at the cross. It's at the cross of Christ. And the next, so how do we escape the judgment? I mean, here we are at the judgment. Who of us can stand? There is no one righteous, no, not one. We have all like sheep gone astray. Don't even try to pretend that you're righteous, that you have any reason for the Lord to save you. Have mercy on me, O God, according to thy great goodness, according to the abundance of thy mercy, blot out my transgressions, wash me thoroughly from my iniquities, for I know my transgressions. My sin is ever before me. Okay, what does it say? Have mercy on me, O God, according to thy goodness, according to the abundance of thy mercy. For I know, for thou art blameless in thy judgment. Thou art blameless in, how does it go? For thou art blameless in thy judgment. When I'm in front, I can't do it. For thou art blameless in thy judgment. My sin is ever before me. Thou art blameless when thou art judged. So his judgment is true. So this morning is placing us there. And I think that it's pointless to figure out if I'm with the sheep or the goats. If I figure out, if I try to be with the sheep, in that very effort, I'm placing myself with the goats. What do the goats say? When did we not minister to you? I mean, this business of ministering to Christ is very hidden, and it's very deep. It goes deeper than just giving food to the poor. I mean, that's certainly part of it, and that's a very important part, but it goes much deeper than that. In fact, it's interesting that this word, again, I mentioned it in the sermon this morning, it says that the women were with him who were ministering to him in Galilee. It's the same word that we find in this morning's gospel, the goats crying out to the Lord. When did we not minister to you? The word is diakonia. It comes from the word for deacon, to serve at table. And there's this, on the back of your bulletin this morning, there's this remarkable pair of psalms that we say on Wednesday, I believe it is, or maybe it's Tuesday. I can't remember which kathism it is. Psalm 50 and 51, or 49 and 50 in the Septuagint. Psalm 49. The God of gods, the Lord has spoken and called the earth from the rising of the sun to the going down thereof. Out of Zion comes the excellence of his beauty. God our God shall come manifestly and shall not keep silence. Can you see the cross there? God our God shall come manifestly. He'll make himself visible. It's a theophany. And the cross is the final and the most perfect theophany. And shall not keep silence. Well, of course, the Lord is keeping silence throughout the trial. He's not saying a word. Until they ask him directly, are you the Christ? Then he says, yes, I am. In effect, he says, yes, I am. On the cross, he's not silent. So, what does he say? On the cross. What does he say on the cross? Exactly. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? So, I mean, and it is finished. Yeah. So here, if the cross is the mystery of the judgment, actually I think it's the mystery of the judgment of God beginning. It's not the final, it's the beginning of the final judgment. So the final judgment is going on now. It has started. It started on Great and Holy Friday. And the judgment, so if that's the judgment, if that's the throne of his, the footstool of his judgment seat, what's the judgment that he's pronouncing? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That's the judgment. For now, that's the judgment. He's not yet saying, depart from me. That will come at the last day. So when we go into Great Lent, we're submitting ourselves to the judgment. We are receiving the judgment of God. You are a goat. Do you notice that what the goats say to the Lord is the same as what the elder brother says to the Father? It's the same as what the Pharisee is praying. What then is the sin of the goats? If we read it in the light of the prodigal and the publican and the Pharisee, what is the essential sin of the goats? What is it? Self-righteousness. Self-righteousness. Egotism. Yeah.
I don't want to get sidetracked. It just seems like there's a lot of imagery here that resonates with the temple.
Okay. What do you see? What are some of the things you're seeing?
The notion of goats, sheep, sacrifices.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Christ is a king, but
Okay.
in these gospel passages, he also figures in as a priest.
Oh,
And then he
Sure.
also, we see him being done to his death, which resonates with the three gifts of the Magi.
mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's only in the temple that the priest can sacrifice in the Holy of Holies.
Yep.
And it seems to suggest that the entire creation is a macrocosm of the Levitican temple.
Absolutely. And what happens in the temple when he's crucified, when he dies?
He becomes almost like the scapegoat that's sent out.
David's got it. What has happened?
The curtain split.
The curtain
Yeah,
of the Holy of Holies.
yeah.
And what does it say? From the top to the bottom, which doesn't mean from the top of the door to the bottom, to the threshold. It means from heaven down into hell. Because like you say, I mean, that is the biblical understanding. The world is the temple. The world is the temple of God.
So in Leviticus, the Jews would have been, they would have stand where we stand in the nave.
In the nave. Mm-hmm.
So we're in the Levitican temple.
Yes. Which is the body of Christ.
Yeah.
His body is the temple. We're in the mystery of the temple. So it's all there. You're right. It's all there. And it's very profound. It's very rich. But let's go back here to focus on what specific lesson the church is giving to us as we draw near Great Lent. So here we are. We're in the judgment. We're at the judgment seat. We're at the foot of the cross. This is where Lent begins. At the foot of the cross, at the judgment seat. Giving to us the understanding that Great Lent, the essence of Great Lent, is about submitting myself to the judgment of God. This is what the priest prays, and I think it's even what the faithful pray when they enter into a temple. Laying aside every excuse, we sinners offer to thee this, to our Master, this supplication, have mercy on us. So we're laying aside the fig leaves. We're laying aside every excuse. We're just standing there at the judgment of Christ on the cross, receiving his judgment. And what is the judgment that we receive? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So now we move into this next week. So this last week we ended at the cross. And Kathy, again, where do we end next week? You already gave us the answer. At the tomb. Now we're at the tomb. And the women, having seen where he was buried and how his body was laid, they returned. Yeah, you want to say they returned home. Well, maybe they did, in actual space-time. So then why doesn't he say that they returned home? And even if he did say they returned home, I think he would mean the same thing as what I'm about to suggest, that what he means to say is that they returned. They turned around. They turned around. So where did they go? What is to turn around? Repent. They repented. Where did they go when they where do we go when we repent? It's a mystical going. It's not a geographical going. It's a mystical going. We go into our soul. And I pointed this out as well, that the verb for rest is hezekusan, which is, the verbal of Hezekiah, which is the technical word in the church for the prayer of the heart. In hesychastic prayer, the work is to descend into your soul and into your heart. Your heart, which is deep beyond all things. Your heart, which is the tomb, because of all the devils that we've let in, all the transgressions that fill our heart, and we try to stay away from it because it's so scary down there. But here we are at the cross, at the judgment seat. Now we're at the tomb. In the judgment, we have submitted ourselves to the judgment of God, and now we find ourselves brought to the tomb of Christ. And it's the Sabbath. So what we are in, the time frame, as I was saying, Great Lent is 6 weeks in terms of time. But in terms of the biblical imagery, Great Lent is beyond time. It's timeless because this is the Sabbath. We're entering into the Sabbath, the mystical Sabbath. We're entering into the Sabbath, which is, it's the foundation of creation. You go to Genesis chapter 1, from out of nothing, God creates the world. Well, from out of nothing. It doesn't say in Genesis 1, but it's clear that God was, before he created, he was resting. But it becomes explicit at the end of Genesis 1, where we go into Genesis chapter 2, where after he completed his creation, he now rests. And he blesses the Sabbath day, because on this day he rested. And in the Septuagint it says, he rested from all the works that he began to do. The Hebrew doesn't say began to do, but the thought is there in the Hebrew as well. Because even in the Hebrew, or in your RSVs, when it says he rested on the Sabbath day and he rested from all the works that he had made, what happens next? You remember Genesis chapter 2? What happens next? Does he stay resting?
So the creation of man.
Yes. Immediately he sets to work again. When there was no water on no grass in the field, and there was no moisture moistening the earth, because there was no man yet to till it. So from his Sabbath rest, God gets up again and sets to work creating man from the dust of the earth. It's a second creation. On Great and Holy Saturday, as we're standing in front of the tomb on Saturday afternoon, we sing the Troparion. This is the mystical Sabbath that Moses was talking about. So that the Sabbath of the Lord is his death on the cross and his burial in the tomb. That's the Sabbath. The first Sabbath that we read about in Genesis is the mystical prefiguring of this Sabbath of the Lord's rest. So now when we go into Great Lent, the Church has placed us in front of the judgment seat of Christ's cross. So we go into Great Lent in the mind of penance, contrition, sorrow, mourning. There should be some mourning. M-O-U-R-N, some weeping, there should be, there should be, a sobering up, a profound sobering up, as we recognize that we have done nothing good on the earth. We are with the goats. We are the publican and the Pharisee. We are the elder and the prodigal, and all of their bad things. And whatever good we do it out of self-righteousness. We do it out of conceit. What does St. Paul say? If I give all of my goods to feed the poor, but I do not have love, it profits me nothing. We do all of our good things so that we can stand with the goats and bleat to the Lord on the last judgment. Oh, but when did we not serve thee? Clearly, there's a deeper thing going on. Going back to Psalm 49. But to the sinner, God has said, why dost thou declare my ordinances and take up my covenant in thy mouth? You hate instruction. You cast my words behind you. If you see a thief, you run along with him. And you have cast in your lot with adulterers. That's biblical language for idolatry. You go after other gods. Your mouth has multiplied wickedness and your tongue has framed deceit. You sat and spoke against your brother. You scandalized your mother's son. These things you did, and I kept silence, and you thought wickedly that I was like you. But now I reprove you and set your offenses before you. And that is what's happening at the cross. He's setting our offenses before us. But how is he doing this? This is the profound thing. How is he doing it? He's doing it by himself suffering our judgment. So his judgment against us is by him taking our judgment upon himself. So in that vision, now we go into next week. And now Luke's gospel will take us to the cross again, as Mark did, but he will take us farther to the tomb. And I think that it's at the tomb that we begin to understand how it is that we can, if you will, escape the judgment. We escape the judgment by receiving it and acknowledging it. And so from Psalm 49, you thought I was like you, but I'm not. Implying, therefore, that we are to become like Christ. So how do we become like Christ and escape the judgment? How? What's Christ doing on the cross? How is he judging us? He's forgiving us. So we escape the judgment by receiving the judgment and letting that judgment work in us, putting to death our self-righteousness, putting to death our conceit, our anger, our hatred, which is probably very deep down, so deep down that we perhaps do not see it. And we start working to become like Christ. We start working to forgive as we have been forgiven. And what is the service with which we begin Great Lent? How do we enter into Great Lent? The rite of forgiveness. So again, this is an appeal. Let's all be at that rite of forgiveness. Let's all be at the Vespers of Forgiveness next Sunday, following the coffee hour. Rearrange your schedule if you have to. How important is it to us? You know, how important is it to us to find God, the real God? How important is it for us to become forgiven, to be cleansed, to find the truth, to be illumined by God himself? How important is it to us? What's our priorities? Or are we idolaters? Are we adulterers? You know, our God is not the God of the Bible. Our God is the God of the world. And we can tell that our God is the God of the world in the way that we treat those we don't like. The mark that we are of the God of the God of the Bible is that we are at least striving to love even our enemy and to forgive those who hate us. We call brother even those who hate us. So do you see, we begin Great Lent with this rite of forgiveness. We end this season on Pascha night when we are singing what? And in the joy of the resurrection, let us call brother even those who hate us, and in the joy of the resurrection, let us forgive all things. So this is what's going on this is what is supposed to be going on during Great Lent. We're supposed to be going into our heart, into our soul, into our heart, and facing ourselves, receiving God's judgment of us, because his judgment is not in order to destroy. His judgment is in order to illumine, to diagnose, to point out to us our sins, so that we know what to confess. We know what we have to let go of. We know what we have to work on. And if we accept that judgment, then his judgment begins to work in us towards our cleansing. So you see, the Great Lent is not just 6 weeks of trying to endure the fast. It's 6 weeks of standing afar off. That is to say, going beyond time and space and entering mystically into our heart and soul and standing there in the timeless presence of God. And in that timeless presence, receiving his judgment and working to become like him on the cross. By starting out by being like him just in a ritual way. I may not be able to be like Christ in my heart, but can I at least go through the motions of that rite of forgiveness? So, it's a challenge to all of us. Let's be there for the service of forgiveness next Sunday.
The key word you're saying is strive.
What else can you?
We're not going to get there.
On your own, you're not going to get there.
We're not going to get there instantaneously.
Correct.
Either.
Right.
And when you talk about those who hate us, I don't have anything against anybody here, but there are people out in the world that I have, people like atheists, like militant, I'm talking about militant homosexuals, not the kind that says, I struggle with it, but the kind that, says, I have a right to be who I am, and if you don't agree, you're an evil person. Or people who are militantly pro-abortion, not just someone who reluctantly says, well, maybe we should allow it because of, but someone who's, the kind of person who would vote even against this bill in the Senate that would have protected babies who were born after a failed abortion.
What it seems to me, Martin, is that that's an example of the nations judging Christ.
Yeah.
And we see it all over the place. That's why I say we judge Christ in many different ways.
But we have to be careful about our attitudes towards those people. We shouldn't hate them. We should pray for them.
Yeah.
And
I think.
You too. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I want to bring up how should the Passion narrative, how should that affect our view of Jews in the modern era? That shouldn't be an excuse to condemn Jews.
The point of the Jews is to point to me.
Yeah.
I'm the Jew.
Yeah.
The point of the Jew isn't that they're a Jew. The point of the Jew is that they are God's own kin.
Yes.
And he was betrayed by his own disciple.
Yeah.
He was denied by his own disciple.
But should we assign that guilt to Jews in the modern?
No, you're not listening to me. That's not what I'm saying.
I know it's not, but a lot of people have used it that way.
Yes, and that
That is a stumbling block for a lot of Jews considering the claims of Christ. I know that.
Yeah.
It is, and I think that's something we need to deal with too.
Well, no, you don't have to. You deal with it in yourself. The world is going to do what it's going to do. You can't stop the world. Yeah, you can't stop. And let God worry about it. This again, you get into the trial of the nations judging Christ. You notice how he's silent. He doesn't say a word. The only time he says a word is when he says, forgive them, for they don't know what they do. And then the only other words that he says that are of any substance are the words that he says to his disciples after his resurrection. Yeah, there's a lot here, lots to think about. We've only scratched the surface. But I hope that we've given, that you see now, you get an idea of what I'm trying to help you to see, that the church is teaching us, if we just learn how to listen, learn how to read and to absorb everything the church is giving to us in the whole, the whole mosaic of her life. As we learn to see everything in connection with everything else, the church is teaching us and leading us deeper into our soul. All right.